Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bloodwise Impact Day. My name's Gemma Peters and I'm Chief Executive of Bloodwise. This day happily coincides with my first Bloodwise birthday, so it's very nice of you all to come to my party. Thank you very much. I get to do something before we start, which I really haven't had to do before, and I think I'm going to really enjoy, which is the safety briefing. So let me tell you that we are not expecting any fire alarms today. So if you, as in tests, we're neither expecting there to be a fire or to test the fire alarm. So if you do hear a fire alarm, then we're going to assume that that is real. And the gathering point is outside Costa Coffee, which is as you came in through the main doors. There are fire marshals in the building who will come and join us, and they'll be wearing bright yellow jackets. There's a door out the front. Don't use the lifts. You can go down the stairs. Anybody with mobility issues, we've got people around who can help, and you need to gather near the back of the room. And there are marshals who will come and help us and escort everyone out, and we'll convene outside Costa Coffee. I think that is all I have to say before we get going. The only thing I'll say as well before we get into the content is we are being live streamed today on YouTube. So this is why we've got the film camera here. It's not Sky News, sadly, but there'll probably be as many people watching us on YouTube. So if you want the details of that to promote it to your friends and people who couldn't make it today but might want to watch, then any of the Bloodwise team who are here with the lanyards like this will be able to give you the details. So let's get started, shall we? So the purpose of today really is to bring together people from around the Bloodwise family to have a chance to learn about what's happened in the last 12 months, learn a little bit more about the science, hear a little bit more about the organisation and some of the work we're doing, and for us to hear from you about how things are going and to share with each other learnings and experience so that we can make Bloodwise better over the coming year. And already the conversations I've had with some of you have taught me some things I didn't know before. So for that, I'm grateful. And I hope that that spirit of conversation and two-way dialogue will continue throughout the day. So if at any point you want to ask questions, then feel free. We've got people in the room who've got roving microphones. So if you do want to ask a question, Ollie at the back is waving one around. And Richard here's got one too. If you put your hand up, then the reason the mic is important is not so that we can hear you, because probably in this room we could get away without a microphone, but people won't be able to hear you on the television channel if you haven't got the microphone. So if you can just wait a second to do that, that would be great. Does that sound okay? People are nodding. Good. I will carry on then. So before I start, I'm not going to introduce you to everyone because it will become obvious throughout the day who's doing what. But there is one person I just want to draw your attention to, John Ormerod, who is in the middle here. John is, in a couple of weeks' time, maybe even less than that now, going to take over as chair of Bloodwise. He is very much in listening and learning mode. I'm really pleased that he can be here. And if anyone would like to have a chat with him, I know he'd be delighted to talk to you. And you can bring him up to speed about what it means to join the Bloodwise family and give him any steer you might want to about what direction the organisation should be going. I'm sure he'll be delighted to hear it. I know that most of us are here today because we've got a very personal connection with blood cancer, either directly or someone that we know. But I think it is worth us just starting with a bit of a kind of scene setting about where we are now in terms of the scale of the challenge. So we know in the last 12 months in the UK there have been 40,000 new diagnoses of people with blood cancer. We know there are 250,000 people in the UK currently living with blood cancer. And sadly, we know that blood cancer is still the third biggest cancer killer in the country. So the scale of what we've got to do remains significant and huge. And you will hear today, though, that there really has been some quite amazing progress made that give us hope that those challenges really are surmountable. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of the research highlights. I'm not going to go into that too much because you've got some amazing speakers coming for the rest of the day who are really going to tell you in detail about some of the science. But from my perspective, I'm just going to pull out 2 or 3 things that I think it's worth us all being aware of. So I'm going to start in Birmingham with an example from Birmingham. not because I'm in Birmingham, I promise I have started with this example in other places too. It's not just a crowd pleaser. But many of you will know the Trials Acceleration Programme that Bloodwise has funded has its hub here in Birmingham, and it's important that it's its hub because that reaches out to all, with all its tentacles, to all parts of the UK. And that programme is about us accelerating access for people to clinical trials. So what the organisation identified a few years ago before I joined was that there were lots of exciting treatments coming along, but there were delays in how they were getting to patients. And Bloodwise as an organisation was funding trials. Chris Bunce, who's here, was part of this decision to really put more money into trials. And yet we were finding that early phase trials were failing because we couldn't recruit enough people to get onto the trials. And so we found that there was a block in the system with bringing in through a network people that were eligible for particular trials to be on them so that those trials could prove the effectiveness of new treatments so that they could be available to all of us. So that programme has been up and running now for a couple of years and is really starting to deliver results. We've seen new treatments being adopted as protocol in the NHS as a result of that programme. And some of the big trials funders, like Cancer Research UK, are now looking at that model to see how they can get their trials to run as effectively. So to give you a kind of metric, on average, it takes a couple of years to put a trial together and for it to start. Trials involved in the Blood Cancer Trials Acceleration Programme are taking between 8 and 9 months. And we think we can probably get that even quicker. So it's a massive difference from what's been available for people with any disease, actually, to what's available at the Trials Acceleration Programme. And the other really important thing that you can kind of forget about that programme when you think about it only as delivering new treatments is the people who are actually on the trials. So many of the trials focus on drugs that we know or are pretty confident are going to have a positive impact for patients, but they can't access them in the NHS. And in the last 12 months, we've had 5,500 patients across the UK be on one of those trials and receive treatment that they would just not otherwise have got. So treatment that has in some cases saved lives, in other cases extended life, that those people would never have had if that programme didn't exist. So I'm really proud of that programme and I'm proud of the difference that we've been able to make over the last 12 months. I also wanted to talk about a programme at Leeds with Pete Hillman. I think I've got a nice photo of Pete. Some of you may know him. He really is a Bloodwise scientist. And when I say really is, what I mean is this organisation that, as you know, has been around for 60 years, has been funding him since he was a PhD student. So he has grown up as part of the Bloodwise family. And he's doing some really exciting work into CLL that over the last 12 months has started to show that in some people, he's now at phase 1 trial, in some people CLL is in complete remission of people on that trial. So it's early stage, the trial is still going on. I saw him a couple of months ago and he was, because we had a check-in to see how that research was going, and he said to me in the coffee break, I think we've cured it. Now I've just got to prove that we've cured it. You know, that I've got goosebumps now, as I'm saying. I got goosebumps when he said it to me at the time. Not very often in the world of cancer research do you get to talk about a cure. And Pete is talking about a cure for one of the most common adult leukemias, which is frankly amazing. And it's not just all about cure, it's also about how we improve treatment. So we've got a Destiny programme happening at Liverpool University at the moment that we're funding, which is looking at CML. And that's really looking at how we can refine treatment more effectively. So you know, I know that the treatments that we use for blood cancer are pretty devastating. And they cause all sorts of damage beyond the damage that they do to the cancer, which obviously we want. We don't want damage to everything else. And that programme's been looking at how it is we can stop over treatment and refine treatment so that people aren't getting side effects when they don't need side effects. And that's showing already that there'll be a lot that we can do, particularly in CML, to avoid side effects. And I couldn't talk about the last 12 months without talking about CAR T therapy. You would have read about it. This is the thing that everyone's hailing as a kind of revolutionary new treatment. And it is a really long time since we've been able to talk about something which is genuinely new in the world of blood cancer, or indeed this will be relevant in the whole of cancer treatments. We've had one approval through for children with ALL. Small numbers of children will be affected, but they're children who otherwise would have had no treatment options. They're at a point in their journey when there would have been nothing else left. And for some of those children, it is a complete cure. So those children are going from no option to not having the disease at all. Now, obviously, there's lots of caution around, and that's right, because we haven't been doing this treatment for long enough to know what long-term consequences are. There's lots of excitement that we might be able to offer this in other sorts of blood cancer and other cancers, but we don't understand how yet. But it does genuinely feel like a game changer. And that there is, as Chris and I were talking about this morning, there is a really powerful story for this organisation in how that has come about in funding the basic research which has led to that breakthrough. So you're going to hear more a little bit about that later when, maybe from Chris, but certainly from Liz, who is talking about research breakthroughs. I want to talk about awareness too. So you all know this. The people in this room are very aware of blood cancer. When you talk to the general public, they're not so aware of blood cancer. We've been using the term hidden cancer as we've talked about it, and we led some work this year to show how hidden it is. So 53% of the population in the UK cannot name a single blood cancer symptom, not one, and yet it is the 5th most common cancer. And that has devastating consequences for people with blood cancer. First of all, it means people aren't recognising that they might have it. So they are either going to the GP late, or when they go to the GP, they're not mentioning all the symptoms that are relevant. And that lack of awareness extends to all sorts of other places too. So if you have blood cancer, then a third of us will have been to our GP more than 3 times before we get referred on to specialist help. And I know by the nods in the room that you'll have heard, like I've heard, the stories of people who've been 15 and 16 times and still not had a referral. There are too many of those too. If you're in the unfortunate position of having breast cancer, then 2% of people with breast cancer went to their GP 3 times or more before they were referred. So there is a massive differential. Blood cancer is the worst cancer for being referred on for diagnosis. And in all blood cancers, although there are different interventions you'd make, late diagnosis is a problem for quality of life and in some cases for survival. So we have been doing a huge amount, but there is a massive amount still to do in terms of raising awareness, and particularly raising awareness of symptoms in the GP community and among the general public, because even if GPs are on it, and remember, a GP sees 1 case of blood cancer a year, so it's not massive, and we know the symptoms are quite general and sometimes hard to piece together. If the public aren't going because they don't recognise that the symptoms are significant, then that is a problem too. So we're doing lots of work in that area. You might have seen some of it. We've had some celebrity endorsement, which frankly just really helped. So we had Kelly Holmes a couple of weeks ago talking about her mum. She sadly lost to myeloma. We've had Simon Thomas talking about his wife, Gemma Thomas, who he lost to AML at the end of last year. And this picture is of Nick Clegg and Miriam talking about Antonio, their son, who has lymphoma. And they had a similar story, delays in diagnosis because they didn't spot. And it was actually a friend of theirs who knew someone with lymphoma who said, I think he needs to get that checked out because he had a lump on his neck. So we need to change the chance diagnosis into people getting help at the right time, and we're working really hard on that. And similarly, that lack of awareness extends to policymakers and government. And we were just chatting earlier on about what an important period of time this is in the UK for us to be influencing the government. So some of you will have been aware that there was a cancer strategy written a few years ago. We're now at the point of looking at how that cancer strategy is done. It's a 46,000 word document, and blood cancer isn't in there once. That's a slight illusion in that there are mentions of types of blood cancer throughout the document, but the problem is blood cancer as a whole is not thought about in the context of that cancer strategy, and that presents massive problems because we know that blood cancer really is different from solid tumour, and it's different in terms of people's awareness, it's different in terms of people's understanding of the disease, it's different in terms of the setting that you're likely to be treated in, a haematology clinic rather than an oncology clinic. It's different in terms of the sorts of treatments options available to you. So only 10% of people with blood cancer are likely to be treated with radiotherapy or surgery. And yet, that's where the big advances have happened in cancer surgery and radiotherapy over the last few years that have brought cancer rates, death rates down. So we need to use the opportunity of the government writing the next 10-year plan, which is happening over the next few months, to make sure that your needs and the needs of blood cancer patients are writ large, are explicit in that document. And we are doing a lot of work to make sure that happens. And I'm really pleased to say that we're making progress now. You'll hear ministers like Steve Brine, who is the cancer minister, talking about blood cancer. Some of you might have seen on our Twitter takeover Henry Smith, who's chair of the all-party parliamentary group on blood cancer, which we convened about 18 months ago, asking a question at Prime Minister's question time, which was good. But what I was more pleased about was the answer that came back and the answers we got later, which showed that some of the messages we're trying to get through about the importance of blood cancer are making it. This is Henry Smith there in the middle, surrounded by Bloodwise ambassadors at one of the parliamentary events that we've done, which I think have already made a difference, but really will make a difference over the next few months particularly. Similarly, that same influencing needs to happen at NHS England, and we're doing the same in Scotland and Wales too, to make sure that it's all very well knowing what to do, but our patients actually getting on the ground the service that we know they need. I talked a little bit about our ambassadors. Some of my highlights of the year have come with ambassadors in hand. So ambassadors are there so that you don't have to listen to me talk about this. You listen to people who have direct experience sharing their story. They've done amazing media work for us. They've been in Parliament talking to MPs and ministers. They've done lots of work in terms of fundraising, of raising awareness. So I'm really grateful for them. Anna Manuel, you're going to be hearing from later on. Anna and I have been Twitter friends for a year, but only got to meet face to face today, which is part of the joy of events like this. And our fundraising has been really, really phenomenal. Like the energy of people who have been coming to the organisation over the last 12 months and the craziness of the things that you are all doing to raise money for us has been truly inspiring. I'm really pleased to say that we had the best year in terms of fundraising that we've had for 5 years last year. So our income was up about £1 million on the previous year, which is brilliant news because that's the only way that we get money to do the things that we've talked about, to fund research or to fund any of our support services. So I am delighted. This is Hugo Griffiths, who some of you might know here on the left. His mum Lisa is an ambassador. Hugo has been leading the charge both in fundraising and in awareness over the last 12 months. You might have seen probably about a year ago, because it was as I arrived, there were kind of posters of Hugo everywhere. They were like on buses, it was on the tube. He was encouraging people to sign up and support Bloodwise. And they've been incredibly brave in sharing their treatment journey over the last 12 months. And there really have been some horrendous ups, some horrendous downs and some amazing ups during that period. But it has really helped people to understand what it means to be a family with a child with leukemia. And I couldn't be more delighted to say that on Tuesday, so in 3 days' time, Hugo is going to take he's going to end treatment. So anyone who's been following them this week will see we get messages saying, and now this is the last one of these we're taking. This is the yucky medicine, Hugo says. This is my last one. So we're all hoping that is the last one. And it's really, really important because sometimes organisations like ours can get really excited, and rightly, I'm really proud of the progress we've made in an area like childhood leukemia, where decades ago we would have been saying 2 in 10 children survive childhood leukemia, and now we're saying 9 in 10 children survive, which is amazing. That still means that 1 in 10 children aren't, and that there's no other thing in your life where you would think 1 in 10 children dying was reasonable. So we can't give up on new treatments in leukemia. But also what Hugo has done is show that those treatments are genuinely horrific and have caused side effects, including disability in him, not being able to walk, lots of side effects that will last for a long time, sadly for him, that Lisa and Hugo have talked about very openly and helped us bring to people who haven't had direct experience, which has been critical. So thank you to both of them, even though they're not here. I couldn't not talk about our branch fundraising, and there couldn't be a better example of branch fundraising, I don't think, than Nicole and the Bromsgrove branch who are here. So I had a brilliant time at Bromsgrove Rugby Club not so long ago at Nicole's invitation. There was amazing music. The room was just packed full of people that over the last 30 years since Nicole lost her son Mark have helped her raise money for Bloodwise and LRF as it was at the time. So they hit their £1 million mark, which is a completely phenomenal achievement, and we are hugely grateful to you, Nicole, and I'm delighted that you and other members of the branch are here today. Thank you so much. And And we couldn't be who we are without the network, certainly from a kind of actually being able to do the work from a financial point of view, but also emotionally. You know, I came to this organisation from a university, but before that I was in the charity sector and worked for a number of different charities. And I can honestly say that I've never, ever worked for an organisation that has the energy and commitment and supporter base that this organisation has. And it is that is the heartbeat and that makes everything we do as successful as it is. And we're nothing without that. And it is the thing, when I have days that are a bit exhausting, or I'm a bit tired, or we're feeling so frustrated that we're not making progress quickly enough, that's the place I retreat to re-energise to all of you and all the work you're doing. So thank you very much. So we have got a brilliant set of talks coming up for you today. I hope that you will have seen the agenda. Before I hand over to Abby, who is, I can't quite see, but I know is here, who's going to talk about, hi Abby, who's going to talk about some of the information support services that we've got. I just wanted to throw it open really to the floor. So I've given you a bit of, that's my highlights of the 12 months, probably more than I was supposed to time-wise. But tell me, you know, I want to hear from you. What are the things that you've experienced over the last 12 months that you might want to share with people? Anyone prepared to kick us off? Good place to start, Nicole.
I might as well. Is it on? Okay. Well, obviously, this year we had our £1 million, which we made just before the 30 years, which I was really, really pleased. But we also organize walks. So we've organized a walk this year. So, in fact, I shall try to repair the injustice we've had there. Could you make sure there is a walk this year coming up, second week in May in Bromsgrove? A run. So a run, second week in May. And Bromsgrove is only one stop away from, you know, in the train. And then you just come out of the train and then here you are. You've got the rugby club and you can do a 10K run. So Emma has promised she was going to do it. And I'm trying to persuade other people as well. We also have walks, two walks we've organised this year, and we organised loads of quizzes, etc. It's hard work raising money, but it's very, very satisfying. And as you say, I've done it because of my son, because I lost my son 30 years ago, and we started the branch in Bromsgrove 6 weeks after Mark was diagnosed with leukemia. And in these days, he had an 80% chance of making it. So that was 30 years ago, and he had an 80% chance. An 80% chance does not mean a 100% chance. And therefore, we need to carry on trying to raise money till we've got a 100% chance. And that's really vital. So, yeah, please carry on the good work. It really is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. If you just raise your hand and then someone will, here we are, they're going to appear with a microphone.
Hi, I'm Anne from the Heart of England branch, that's sort of South Warwickshire. Great highlights this year, I think. The fact that you can still get out on the streets and collect money. It's much harder than it used to be, but there are people still giving. And so we are raising money still on the streets. Great if we could have contactless. I'd like to see that in the charity so that so many people walk past you saying they haven't got coins in their pocket. We've run every couple of years a race night, tabletop, piece of board, lots of little animals, and people just buy little betting like you used to have them on the screen. But that is such a fun night. Thoroughly recommend that. And we raised about £1,100 earlier this year, which was great. And then we're hoping our big highlight will be that on October the 13th, we're hosting a grand ball and charity auction. And that's between Leamington and Kenilworth in a lovely hotel. Tickets are £40. So if anybody would like to have a trip out to Warwickshire to join us on our ball, see me later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello,
It's on.
we're the Lutterworth and District branch, and we've got the only 2 shops for blood whites in the world. We've got two shops and a warehouse, and Leslie's the senior manageress, and she'll tell you all about it.
Hello, everybody. Our shops are amazing. I've got to brag about our shops. We're in the middle of the country. We've got Lutterworth's a tiny little town, 8,000 people. Last year, through the branch and the shops, we handed over £100,000. And that's amazing from such a tiny little place. The shops evolve every day. You never know what's going to come through the door, and it is an amazing way of raising funds. We've got the part of the branch as well where we do sponsored events like coffee mornings and quiz nights, which we have fun with, and skittle nights. But the bulk of it comes through the shops, and it's an amazing thing to do, to get that interaction with people that will drive for 40, 50 miles just to come to the Bloodwise charity shops. And it's just, I don't know, it's humbling, isn't it? Yeah, we get called Harrods in Lutterworth because the other charity shops are not up to our standards. We are quite fussy about what we put out. We only put out things that we would wear. And we've got one shop that sells books and furniture, and the other shop sells general charity shop stuff. And it's amazing. And we've done our million. We're now on our way to 1.5 million for the branch. Branch has been running since 1971. 71, yeah. So and it's Lutterworth.
Amazing. Well done, you. Brilliant. Just to support what you're saying, I can say the treasurer of Bloodwise, who lives in just near Northampton, comes and does his Christmas shopping with you every year, then, doesn't he? Gets the estate car, brings you a load, and then he says he always comes back with more than he's come to drop off. Got it over here.
Thank you very much. John Purser, South Birmingham District Branch. One thing I'd like to just mention, we're only relatively small branch now, collections and one or two different things. We recently did tombolas at a vintage fair, and we were given retro-style lingerie, and it went very well indeed. We raised £300. But the one thing I wanted to mention was the support of other people. It was actually 2 years ago, the previous Lord Mayor of Birmingham, Councillor Carl Rice, chose our charity to be one of his 2 charities of the year. And earlier in this particular year, we received a donation of over £21,000. Emma was very much involved in this, and certainly when he came round and visited the researchers here, he was very impressed. So I'd just like to mention that we have many other people to thank, and a special thank you from us to Councillor Carl Rice, who's now an honorary member of our branch.
Oh,
thank
great.
You.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Louise. People have been talking about fundraising, but I'm an ambassador, and this year I've done several talks around the country, as Emily knows. My husband and myself are speaking at the Christie on Thursday at a wellbeing event. And I think also the launch of the forum has been very important this year. And I wish something like that had been around 11 years ago when I was first diagnosed. And I hope it will help a lot of people. Thank you.
I'm so pleased. Thank you for raising that, and also sparing my embarrassment, because it was down here for me to say it and I didn't say it, so thank you very much. Online communities are going to be so important in terms of how we provide information and support. Thank you.
I don't know if I really call myself a fundraiser. I really did some fundraising last year for the first time. But my son came to me and said, will you do something crazy? So we took a £200 car and drove it to Mongolia, raising £3,000. So from 10k to 17,000k.
Thank you.
My name's Mel Plumridge. I'm a Bloodwise ambassador. You can tell by the T-shirts. So you can spot us all around the room. This year, highlights for me, I'm on the FLAIR trial, which is for CLL, and I was given the good news that I'm in complete remission this year.
Amazing.
So that's absolutely fantastic, and that's obviously due to lots of the funding that comes in from the various charities that go on to funding trials. So that's great. And since then, this year I managed to sort of do my 4th marathon. This is the only one I've done with good blood levels. Previous ones were compromised. So this one was a good one, and I managed to sort of break 4 hours in Edinburgh. Thank you.
That's brilliant. That's what it's all about. Anyone else want to share any reflections or highlights? I've had quite a lot. Okay, well, there's lots of opportunity for you to do that throughout the day. So if there's something you think you wish had been said or you think of it later on, then just let us know and we'll create a little space for you to do that. So now I am definitely handing on to Abby. Good. So Abby House is coming to the front stage. Abby works with me. She's based in our Holborn offices, which, by the way, if you're ever in London, please come and see us. We're really keen for you to come and see where that is based. Abby's our patient information manager, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about our services. Thank you.
Is there a bit of water here?
I'll get you some.
Hello, I'm the Patient Information Manager at Bloodwise. My name is Abby. I only started at Bloodwise in May, but I'm absolutely loving it. And today is my first event and my first chance to speak for Bloodwise. And I've really enjoyed this morning already. And it's so great to see so many people here, our ambassadors, branches, staff. It's just, really been a really nice start to the day. Thank you. So Bloodwise's mission, our mission at Bloodwise, is to help people affected by blood cancer to live life to the full. And we do this with your help, with everyone in the room's help, through various ways, one of which is providing information that people can trust and understand about blood cancer to help people live with their condition, cope with it, and have the best quality of life that they can. We also provide our support services, so over the phone, by email, by live chat online. We work with healthcare professionals as well, so we have an e-learning module for healthcare professionals, so we can try to improve knowledge and awareness about blood cancer and support nurses to support their patients as well. And we bring people with blood cancer together, and that's a real kind of unique key part of, I think, what it means to work for Bloodwise is the community that we are all together. So fundraisers, volunteers, researchers, staff, people affected by blood cancer, of course. And so we want to really bring everyone together across all different conditions, all different situations, but we're all working together towards the same mission. And we also work really, really hard in the background in our policy teams and campaigns, to influence the government and NHS cancer policy and national cancer care, which Gem's alluded to already. So that's a bit of a summary of kind of the different ways that we tackle this challenge that we have. And some of the things that we're most proud of in the information and support and policy teams are, first of all, ibrutinib and CAR-T. So this year we've heard a bit about CAR-T already, but for ibrutinib, our policy team, and I'm speaking on behalf of them, so I'm sorry if I don't get a lot of the detail of this across, but with our policy and campaigns team have campaigned this year to reverse a decision that ultimately meant some patients with CLL were not able to access ibrutinib, and they now are. So that was a real key achievement for our policy team. And secondly, CAR-T, we've been spending most of 2018 campaigning for this new treatment, trying to influence the NHS to get it to be made available on the NHS for people. It's a revolutionary new way of giving treatment, and we're delighted that it is now available via the Cancer Drugs Fund for small numbers of children with ALL. And Bloodwise will continue with CAR-T in our policy team to try and make sure that becomes available to more and more people and more conditions in the future. Our watch and wait information is also something we've been working on in the last year. So we've developed some information and resources specifically for people who have been diagnosed in a unique position where they've been diagnosed with a blood cancer but told that they won't be having treatment and they'll be placed on watch and wait. So some of you might know what that is, but it's where there's no clear benefit to starting treatment straight away. So you may have regular monitoring and blood tests and things, but it's the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis and not going into treatment is huge. And it creates anxiety, and it's a really situation that other people don't really understand, and it's not part of the general cancer story, so it can be really isolating as well. So we've produced a whole range of new resources about watch and wait to help people understand why would they be placed on it, is it safe, how can I explain this to other people, what do I tell my employer, for example. And so that's a whole range of resources that we're really proud of in the last year. And we have got an animation to show you about that. We're hoping to produce more and more multimedia now in our patient information. But this is a link. Will it work? Oh. Maybe you might need to go on the website. Okay, that's fine. And finally, our online community. We're so happy and excited. We've got our online community forum live on the website so that people with blood cancer or friends and relatives can join and talk to each other and share, support each other. And it's just very exciting to have our forum finally live. And I think that will be a key support service going forwards, and it will grow. There's lots of conversations already happening on there. People are talking about things like how do they tell their children, how do they explain blood cancer, and they're able to support each other in really valuable ways just from around the country. So that's one of our key achievements also. I thought as well it would be best just to, rather than go on about all our achievements, hear about the impact that these things are actually having, that we believe are having really positive impact. But these are quotes from our actual people who have used our information and support services. And it's really important for us to be listening to this feedback and hearing it. Are they readable, or should I read them out? Yeah. So there's a quote from someone who saw Bloodwise in Parliament. So that was where we had Bloodwise visited Parliament, and we were engaging with MPs to make sure, as Gemma said, that blood cancer is featured as predominantly as it should be and explicitly in cancer strategy. We've also got we've had feedback from people who've used our information booklets who've said, I understand my condition so much better now, I've digested everything in your booklet. And that's the reason why we produce the patient information, is to help people understand, make sense of this confusing, challenging time, and find out what things they can do to make themselves, to help themselves and to get through the treatment. 80% of hospitals across the UK that do have haematology units do order our patient information, so we're really pleased with that, but we need to reach the last 20%, and we're going to work really hard to make sure that everyone that's diagnosed with a blood cancer will have a Bloodwise patient information publication, or whether it's signposting to the website or the online community, but they will receive our information. It will be put in their hands, if you like, and from then they'll know all the support and information that we can give. There's a nurse also there who has used our e-learning module, so that's a basic introduction to haematology for haematology nurses working in blood cancer, and it's really to help improve knowledge and awareness of blood cancer and the issues that patients might face, psychological and social, as well as physical and emotional. And a really nice quote from someone who's used our online community there, saying that they've been scooped up in a protective web of love and support, and that's just exactly what we want the online community to do. And this slide, so all these achievements and improvements that we've seen and developments in our information support have really all come from everyone that's part of the Bloodwise community, the Bloodwise family, staff, researchers, fundraisers, everyone here in the room. So everything I feel that we talk about today, we should all be proud of together. We've done it as a team. This just shows the whole range of ways that people affected by blood cancer, including our ambassadors, have helped us to get this far. It's not working. Anyway, so for example, being in Parliament, campaigning, influencing key decision makers in government and healthcare, being on TV, talking, improving blood cancer awareness, fundraising, events, local community work with branches and shops, events, social media. So there's a whole loads of activity going on across the board, and all of it is really helping us achieve our mission of supporting people affected by blood cancer, and we're all working together on that. So thank you all to everyone who's here and everyone who is involved. And just a quick look at what we're hoping is coming up in the future. We know that we need to improve our digital offering and build on it and have a look at our website and make it so that it's easy for people to find the information and support that they need. We're also excited to start producing information about living with blood cancer and looking at more holistic issues rather than, so that at the moment where we're focusing on clinical information, we really want to branch out into supporting people through the emotional impact of blood cancer, the impact it has on your life, how it affects you, and that's something that we're going to be working on over the next year. Engaging people with blood cancer, of course, people with different types of blood cancer, people living with chronic conditions, people who are in remission, just to see what the key issues are and what people need information and support on in relation to those. We'll also be, of course, developing our support services more. The online community is a big one, so it's so new and young, but building on it, growing it, having lots more members. Do join it or just have a look at it. And so, because there'll be so much development work we can do with that over time to make it a real big support network for people. And we're going to look at how we can make it easier for people to get involved in Bloodwise and volunteering and things like that. And we will continue campaigning and doing our policy work with the government to influence access to treatments, access to new drugs, but improving treatments as well, trying to make them side effects less severe, and just always making sure that we're talking about blood cancer with key decision makers and people in government who can influence the cancer policy and make sure that all of our voices and experiences are heard and the key issues are met. So that's going to be exciting for the next year. And thank you very much for listening. And do go on our website to find out about our online forum and our other information and support services. Thank you.
Farhad's coming up. Let me introduce Dr. Farhad Khanim, who's coming up to talk to us about her research, which has been started quite a long time ago, but has some very exciting updates that she's going to share. So I'm going to hand to her now. Do you want to stand here? Thank you.
I'm going to be good. Well, hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you. And firstly, I want to say a huge thank you for letting me to come and talk to you guys. I work in that building over there, the tall one, and the bit at the top, which has very few windows, is where I tend to spend most of my life. I've had the pleasure, and it is a genuine pleasure, to be part of the Bloodwise family for the last 15 years. And I have to say the time has flown by. We don't want to stare in my face too long, do we? And this is some of the other members of the Bloodwise family on campus at this university and across at the hospital over there. So we have over here at this end the basic research. These are guys who are just trying to understand how do cancers develop, what goes wrong, what happens normally in our bodies, and then what goes wrong to give rise to the tumours that we have. And then that is the kind of information that hopefully then leads into development of treatments. And then at this end, we have the clinical teams. They're the guys who actually deliver the impact in the clinic. What I would say I do, and together with Chris Bunce, is we sort of sit somewhere in the middle. We do a type of research that I like to call translational, which is taking the observations from the basic science and turning it into something which is of patient benefit, i.e. a new treatment. Now, a little bit about who I am. I was asked to give a little bit about who I am, so I have to say, first and foremost, I'm a proud Brummie. And not just that, I did my PhD at this university many years ago, up the road, and I was working on a virus, Epstein-Barr virus, and actually it was cancer, and it was a cancer that affects predominantly people in China, called nasopharyngeal carcinoma, but interestingly, that virus is associated with many different cancers, some of which are blood cancers. I have 23 nieces and nephews, and recently became a grandmother, which is really exciting. But I worked, after my PhD, I worked in cancer for 6 years or so, and I always had a feeling that the work that I was doing was not really the kind of work I wanted to do. It was exciting, it really scratched the intellectual itch, but it didn't really give me the satisfaction of knowing that I was going to help patients. And then, 15 years ago, I met these individuals, although I actually know Chris a lot longer than that, and I joined them as a postdoc on their Bloodwise programme grant. So a programme grant is 5 years of funding. And the beautiful thing, and I think Gemma touched upon this beautifully, is that Bloodwise is one of the few funding agencies that actually supports researchers long term. If you want to see the benefits of research, you need to invest long term. And you have to invest in individuals, but in concepts and ideas long term as well. That's very important. In 2013, I had the joy of becoming my own boss. I got my own programme grant, and we've had some more funding. So I'm one of the people who spends all the money that you raise. And if any of you are ever interested in coming and seeing a lab and seeing what tumour cells look like down the microscope and you're local, please just let us know. We'll give you a tour of the labs. Give me a warning, we may need to tidy up a little bit though, just okay? Now, this is what I want to talk about, the drug development process. How do we get new drugs into the clinic? Okay? We always start off with a target, and this model is based on what the pharmaceutical industry work upon. I know there are pharmaceutical reps in the building, so they're going to correct me if I'm wrong. But normally what they start off with is some kind of a target, a mutation, a pathway which has been identified usually through academia. They screen for compounds, chemicals that may actually target that particular pathway. And then we have to go through a huge series of steps to the point where we can enter for clinical trials. That includes animal experiments. We then have to do clinical trials, phase 1s, phase 2s, and phase 3s. And then you have to go for approval. Hopefully, at the end of that, you do end up with a drug, which is going to be effective against the treatment, the condition you want to treat. Now, for the pharmaceutical industry, the cost associated with that is that. That's the timeline. We're talking 12 to 15 years. And the cost has now been estimated at approximately, depending upon which report you read, about $2 billion US. That's not cost effective. It does work. It generates drugs that are effective, but that's not the way that we're going to get new treatments rapidly into the clinic. And the reality is that this pipeline works very well for conditions which affect lots of people, but when you have rarer conditions, and many cancers, blood cancers, are classified as rare diseases because they don't affect huge numbers of patients, then they are not a priority for the pharmaceutical industry. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we find treatments for those people? Not just that, we have to also ask the question, and this is sort of a moral question, is that how do we find treatments for people who don't live in developed countries, who live in poorer countries, where there isn't that investment in treatments that affect them? And so what I'm going to talk about is drug. So is there a faster way? Can we speed that process up? And the answer I'd like to say is yes, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And my story began with Bloodwise because of two drugs, these two. And this is a combination of a cholesterol-lowering drug called bezafibril, excuse me, bezafibrate, which lowers your cholesterol. How many people take statins in the room? Of some description. Okay, there's a few. We're all familiar with those, but the bezafibrate was one of the drugs that preceded the statins. And over here, we have the contraceptive pill, or also used as part of HRT. Now, the combination that we call BAP, Chris and the team, before I joined them, had already identified this combination as actually being quite potent at killing leukemia cells and lymphoma cells in the lab. Importantly, both of these drugs are dirt cheap. They're available in the clinic. Doctors are very familiar with them. We also know who can take them and how much is safe to give them, which is very, very important. So I joined the lab 15 years ago, as I said, but we showed that BAP kills tumour cells. In some respects, that's the easy bit. So over here, these are primary leukemia cells. So these are leukemia cells taken out of a patient, put into the lab. This is what they look like normally. These have been stained up. They're not normally purple. We've coloured them up. And then this is what happens when you put the drugs on them, and they're dead. So in the lab, these drugs are very good at killing the tumour cells. But it also was very effective at killing a tumour called Burkitt's lymphoma, which is a lymphoma which does affect people here in the West, but predominantly affects children in this part of the world, where it accounts for more than half of the cancers that children get. So the only way to know, we did a huge amount of science, and I don't really have a time to go into the science, but we've done a huge amount of science to understand how these drugs work. And what's really interesting is that these drugs are dirty. They do all kinds of things. They target multiple pathways, but that is also the argument for why they're going to be so effective, because they do multiple things to the tumour cells. But importantly, what we already know is that they don't harm healthy normal cells, because patients take these drugs all the time anyway. And if they did harm the normal healthy cells, we'd know it by now. So we were brave enough to take the big step to take them into trial. And so this trial here, don't worry too much about it. The first trial was just taking 20 patients with AML, acute myeloid leukemia. These were end-stage patients. We tried everything. There was nothing left for them. Of those 20 patients, 11 saw hematological improvement, and we saw transfusion independence. Mr. Grumpy, bless him, survived 3.5 years and complained the drugs from everything from his knee pain to everything. He was 83. And he said everything was the problem with the drugs. But actually, it kept him alive for an extra 3.5 years. We then did a dose escalation study where we tried to increase the amount of drug that we give to the patient. And what we found very rapidly is actually you can't increase the amount of drug, because the amount of drug we were giving was safe, there were no side effects, patients tolerated it really well, but when we tried to put more in, it became toxic. And not necessarily because it's toxic, it's because kidney function is bad in some of these patients. We also did the trial in Africa, in Malawi, and we treated 98 children with Burkitt's lymphoma, and we saw an improvement in those children as well. And importantly, we saw no toxicity. Gemma's touched upon this. What we need isn't just effective treatments, it's treatments that are non-toxic. What we want to do is get the 90% cure rate, if not higher, 90+% cure rate that we see in our paediatric ALL patients without the toxicities that we see on current treatment. That's really important. Now, how do we take that process up? Now, Chris will be the first to say it took us how many years to get to BAV?
I wasn't great when we started.
Yes. So we thought, how do we speed this whole process up? And so what we thought is the pharmacies are full of drugs. So I read the book called The British National Formulary, which is the book that your doctor prescribes your drugs from. And I randomly selected 100 drugs through the whole book. Now, this is 100 along the bottom. We included a few chemotherapy drugs as controls in there. And what we did was we effectively threw them onto lots and lots of tumour cells and said, what happens? Now, that blue line, which I realise is not very clear, is that if you have 100% viable cells, i.e. the drugs are doing nothing, you get a nice big red bar. But when the red bar drops down, it means that that drug is actually killing or reducing the growth of those tumour cells. And what we've done is we've used this library. In all of our many tumour models, we've used it in leukemias, lymphomas, myelomas. But not just that, we've shared it with anybody who wishes to use it. because that's the other part of the ethos of working in the Bloodwise family, is that we are here to help each other. So we've shared this, and I'll touch upon some of the potential successes that are growing with that. So what are the drugs that we've got? So what we're doing here, I would say, is we're turning that drug development model on its head. We're actually starting with the drug, or drugs, I should say, in the first place. And what we do is we screen. We take our tumour cells and we just put the drugs on and say, do they or do they not kill? Importantly, we'll do things like, for example, if we know that a particular tumour is has gained resistance to a drug, for example, bortezomib, we'll say what we want to do is make these cells resensitized to bortezomib. So it isn't just about looking for treatment, it's about thinking about patients who, for example, have developed resistance. We then go away and try and understand how the drugs are working, and that's great for as a scientist. It satisfies the intellectual bit, because what it does is it teaches us these drugs are very dirty, they do lots and lots of things, and importantly, we don't look for drugs that work on their own, we tend to look for drugs in combinations. And so the idea is we batter the tumour cells so hard, there is no way that it's going to get around what we're doing to it. And remember, we're using drugs which are already used in the clinic. You can buy many of them over the counter, and so we know that they're safe in patients. We may or may not need to do the animal studies, because, of course, these are drugs that we already are familiar with, so we don't necessarily always have to do the animal studies, which means that we can take some of that out of the equation. And then we can go into phase 1 and phase 2 to check the safety of those drugs, which we have done, and then we go into the phase 3s. Reviews and approvals, and then hopefully we get a drug into as a new treatment protocol. What's currently cooking in the pipeline? So this is a triple. So BAP looked very promising, and the fact that we couldn't escalate the dose of the drugs told us we needed to look for a third drug. So we went back and looked in our library, which is, oh, by the way, the library is called FMC for Farhat, Mark and Chris. We couldn't think of anything else to call it. And so the new combination we're trying is VBAP. So valproate is actually used to treat epilepsy. So we're taking a drug for epilepsy, a drug which is used as part of HRT or contraceptive, and a lipid-lowering drug as a triple combination. And we are in the processes of developing and designing a national randomized clinical trial in myelodysplastic syndrome. And we're hopefully applying for funding for that in the next few weeks, if I remember correctly. Importantly, this is the first trial in MDS which is aimed at hematological improvement, not just patient management, but actually improving the disease in these patients. This is another one that I've tested, and it's very exciting. This is for Burkitt's lymphoma. Zinc, the stuff you can buy over the counter from any supermarket. I've been taking zinc since I've done these studies, and by the way, 1/3 of us in this room are actually zinc deficient, just because we don't eat enough of it in our diet. And combine it with a drug that we use for treating gout. And the combination has proven very effective against these Burkitt lymphoma cells. But what's really exciting is that we have some evidence to suggest that the zinc especially may not just be as a treatment option, there may be potential for prevention as well. But we need to do a lot of science before we can demonstrate that. But it's very, very exciting. And the third combination, which is furthest along, is valproate. Again, it's an interesting drug, valproate. So it's an anti-epileptic combined with a drug called niclosamide, which is used to treat tapeworm infections. Believe it or not. And hopefully most of us don't ever suffer with tapeworm infections. But niclosamide has proven to have huge amount of anti-tumour activity. The problem is that it's actually not very available. When you take a tablet, these are, by the way, these are all oral drugs. That's the other thing we focus on, is tablets that people can take at home so that you don't have to come into hospital all the time to have your treatments. And so we're developing new derivatives of niclosamide, which will go straight to the bone marrow in myeloma patients and try and deliver a higher dose to the bone marrow. The data we're writing up at the moment, and hopefully we're going to aim to go to clinical trial. But what's really exciting about this, and also the other drugs, is that they're telling us about new disease biology that we didn't know. It tells us about what goes wrong in those tumours and how we may be able to take advantage of that for killing those tumour cells. All of these drugs are safe to give to people, and these are all oral drugs, which means that we have potential to move from identification in the lab into clinical trial very, very rapidly, which is very, very important. But there is more, because as I said before, we've been sharing the library. These are some of the projects, the blood cancer projects we're working on. But we've shared the library. We've got combinations and drugs that are in development for ovarian cancer, bladder cancer, head and neck, and also for treating trypanosomes. And I also have a project on trypanosomes and camels, because camels are a big industry in Egypt, and we need to be able to kill the trypanosomes in the camels. It's fascinating. What about longer term? Now, FMC was 100 drugs. There's actually thousands in the pharmacy. There are actually routinely used about 1,200 drugs in our chemists. So what potential do those drugs have? And so I would say that what we've done in our work so far is only really scratched the surface. And the really exciting thing is both the academic community and our pharmaceutical partners are really sort of getting this repurposing excitement, and they're doing more and more work around it. This is where I would really, really like our work to go. This is the Centre for Accelerated Drug Redeployment. The aim of this is to be able to harvest all of the potential which is in our pharmacies already to find effective and efficient cures as rapidly as possible and get them into clinic. And we're going to be ambitious. We're saying that what we'd like to be able to do is identify effective, affordable combination therapies and deliver them to early phase clinical trials within 3 years. Not 12 to 15, but 3 years, which is the cost of an average grant, which is, I think, very exciting. Now, the point I'd like to make, having worked in this community for 15 years and having done cancer research for longer than that, is that Bloodwise is making a difference. You see it around you. We've heard some of the success stories, but it genuinely is happening, and it's happening all around you on this campus. You are part of the Bloodwise family. And by the way, I didn't know that was a phrase before Gemma started mentioning it. So your fundraising is actually making a huge difference. You actually pay for the equipment that we buy up there and the salaries. And by the way, you've been paying my mortgage for the last 15 years. So thank you very much. But you are making a difference. And I have to say, as a researcher standing up here who set out many, many years ago to try and make a difference, is without you guys and with all the work that you do, I wouldn't be able to achieve my goal. But importantly, I wouldn't be able to achieve our goals. So thank you very much to all of you. Oh, questions. I've been told there is time for questions.
I'm really pleased to see that you're repurposing old drugs. And one that I've read about from time to time is metformin. Is that one of any interest to you? Yeah.
There's a huge amount of excitement around metformin. And it isn't just about treatment, it's actually about prevention as well. So what I actually should say is that many of these drugs, whilst we're discovering new uses in terms of treatment, what we're understanding is that many people who take these drugs for years, for example, their diabetes, it actually may potentially reduce your risk of developing cancer or other conditions. There is a huge interest around metformin, and the reason is because as we understand it at this point in terms of tumours, it targets the metabolism of the tumours. And there's a huge amount of fascinating research being done around understanding how tumour cells utilise their metabolism differently. If you think about it, your skin is an organ, and you are constantly replacing it all the time. So there is a process of what we call cell division taking place, producing more cells, and cell death. And that is in perfect balance, which is also why you have house dust. But if that goes wrong, that's that's how you start to get conditions like cancer, etc. Now, a tumour cell wants to grow rapidly. And what it does is it needs more energy and it needs more building blocks to produce more tumour cells. And it does that through its metabolism. And we believe that metformin may be actually targeting that metabolic process. Oh, Chris is going to ask me a question.
I'm not going to ask a question. I'll just make a comment that sometimes people think that new drugs are really important and old drugs won't work. And I just want to point out that in blood cancers, there's this thing called thalidomide, which radically changed the treatment of myeloma. And there's this thing called Atra, which radically changed the treatment of acute promyelocytic leukemia. Well, Atra was first prescribed in China for skin conditions. So this is not a crazy notion. And one of the beauties of doing drug redeployment work or repurposing work within the blood cancer community is that the clinicians know that it can work.
Yeah.
Just thought I wanted to make that comment.
Yeah. I mean, it is true. So blood cancers have been driving the way for reusing drugs in new ways and actually developing curative treatments. So, and part of that is to do with the fact that actually it's very easy to get a sample compared to a lump, because, you know, we're talking about either a blood sample or a bone marrow biopsy. So, you know, blood cancers have driven the way in understanding cancer biology in a way that no other cancer has. John?
As somebody who has only recently joined this family, I have to say this has been a most exciting and interesting story. And a lot of what we do is focused on the activities we undertake. We've had the most fantastic activities that people are taking to support what we're doing, but this is the heart of where we can make a difference. And in doing that, I'd just be interested to understand, if you look at the research process you're following, the repurposing and so on, is this a technique that's used widely throughout medical research? How do you share this knowledge so that we can leverage all of the knowledge and capture it to deal with the challenges that face us in blood cancer?
That's a very good question. The truth of the matter is, and I didn't bring a graph. I have a graph of how drug repurposing has gained in popularity. So when Chris first started doing drug repurposing with BAP, nobody really talked about it. In fact, it was incredibly unfashionable. And that's true for all major discoveries in science, is that usually something which becomes hugely mind-changing, sort of paradigm-changing, started off as something which people sort of generally didn't think of as being very important. The good thing is that drug repurposing is now recognised as a route through which you can do drug development. And there are more and more academic partners who are doing it. The real challenge that we have is that what we need to do is link up the pipeline from the drug identification, identifying the drugs that work and getting them into the clinic. Now, I can speak to you that some of those projects that we are doing at the moment have arisen because there were academic researchers who said, I've identified this cool target, but I need some drugs. Or I've got a drug, but I don't know how to get it into the clinic. So if we want to be really efficient and effective, and this is my personal opinion, obviously other people can think slightly differently, at really accelerating the rate at which we identify those repurposed drugs, find out who they're going to be effective for, and get them into the clinic, we have to link together all the processes that it takes to go from that development phase into the clinic. And that means partnering up our academics with our clinicians so that we have that conversation right from the very beginning. But running a clinical trial, there's all kinds of processes and forms and boxes that you have to tick. If you don't know your way around it, it's a minefield. So finding the links between the people, finding the expertise and linking it all together is what is going to lead to acceleration of the drug repurposing process. But it has to be said that there is always going to be a drive for the new drugs, and generally speaking, most people get excited about the new baby that comes through the pharmaceutical companies, and that's human nature. And so we have worked hard against it because we've always stuck to the guns about the fact that we believe that repurposing is one of the complementary ways we can get into the clinic faster. So I think we need to keep fighting the good fight, but importantly, make resources available to researchers and clinicians, and also raise awareness as well.
Can I ask one quick supplement?
Yes.
I'll shout it.
No.
in terms of big pharma, to the extent that these drugs are out of patent, then there's not as much money for them in this. Does that mean that big pharma is resistant to this idea or highly supportive? I appreciate it cuts the 1 to 2 billion pipeline, but the payback is less at the far end.
Absolutely. And this is a real challenge. So I actually sit on the steering committee of something called the UK Therapeutic Cancer Prevention Network. And we, together with the medical research charities and a whole host of other charitable organisations, and also Department of Health, we pulled together a paper on how can we speed up the licensing process, because that is complicated, it is expensive, and is currently not set up to support repurposing opportunities for generics. Most of the drugs we're working with are generic drugs. However, what I will say is that although the government is on board, they're rather busy with something called Brexit at the moment. And so trying to push through this new pipeline is a little bit difficult. However, there is a pipeline now acknowledged and set up with the MHRA. Now, what I would say on the last point is that what we need to do is engage with not just the pharmaceutical companies, which we are. So we're trying to access drugs that they've deprioritized so that we can rescreen them for new uses, which is a process that is underway. But critically, we need to link up with the British Generic Manufacturers Association, who are the people who generate and produce those generics. And if what we can do is there are mechanisms through things like tax credits, etc., where we may be able to find sufficient incentive for those companies to take these drugs on board.
Hi, thanks for answering another question. Leading on from that, we've seen some drugs, patents for the generics being bought up by other companies, and then effectively the price massively inflated. That's happened with quite a few blood cancer drugs as well, has it? The government needs a strategy, I don't know if you can influence that, to stop the companies, buying up these patents, just being the one company, and then massive, by thousands of % inflating the price and making them unaffordable again.
Absolutely, I do agree with that. I think we have to reach, a point of pragmatism. Without the support of the large charities or large organisations, we can't actually afford to run the large phase 3 clinical trials. That's the reality. The large-scale phase 3s cost millions to run, and you can be collecting data for many, many years. So what we really need is a mechanism for finding ways to fund the research that we need to do and fund that research and the clinical trials, ideally by bringing the pharmaceutical companies on board. Now, we've used a policy where we tend to disclose everything, so you can't put a patent on it. It may not be the right way to do it, because what we sort of had a mindset was we want everybody to access the information so that if it's useful for their disease models, they would be able to use it. What we really need to do is actually have the conversation with government, and this is where some of this first paper has started to try and work, is that the generics and these drugs, how can we protect the IP around them, and in a way that we can't get that massive price hike. We may need a small price hike to make it feasible to get that drug into clinic for that particular indication, but I would argue that this is where we, as a community, you guys, your voice is incredibly powerful. The charities' voices are incredibly powerful. This is the point at which we come together with the researchers and, for example, the generics manufacturers, and we lobby and we say we need protection of prices on these drugs, so that drugs, the reason we screen these drugs is because they are affordable and they're effective. We need to keep them affordable and effective, and this is where lobbying together as a community becomes incredibly important. Anna.
Hi. Right, going on a different thing now. I just wanted to say that as an ambassador and a fundraiser for Bloodwise, that this has been really interesting because, like I'm sure with all the other fundraisers, why we do what we do is because of people like you and the breakthroughs and the work that you do, because at the end of the day, we all want to see, you know, changes, results, cures, dare we say it. So I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge. It's been really interesting, and all this other last bit about the generics and everything, because I think we have to just keep shouting and keep, you know, all of us have got a voice, and if we all do our little bit, then perhaps someone will listen. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Anna.
It's wonderful to read in the latest accounts that over £4 million has been given in grants to the University of Birmingham. That's wonderful news, especially as it's only about 10 million altogether. But I feel what we need to do is to make that more publicly aware. That would raise awareness. And I would hope that you would agree, but perhaps make it even better to give more grants. But we need to get the information from the grants to make the public hopefully support us more. But thank you very much for your work and for all your colleagues as well.
Thank you. There's one more. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Farhat. Just one question. What's the role for artificial intelligence in this? Because if we have all the information for the biochemical pathways associated with all these drugs, it seems like an ideal application for it. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's a really good point. So when we talk about drug repurposing, there are potentially two ways of doing it. You either throw the drugs onto the tumour cells and see what works, but also, as you say, quite rightly, that we have a huge amount of information of how we think these drugs are working, and so you can do computational modelling and predictions about what drugs may work in a different disease setting. There are assumptions within that. There are assumptions that you know exactly how the drugs are working. You need to know the pathway which is aberrant in the disease that you're looking in. And then you can start combining the two. And there is a huge amount of work actually being done internationally to use those sort of AI approaches to identify potential drugs that we should be testing. And some of them are working, actually. But I would also argue that from our own research, what we've learned is that the drugs don't always work through the pathways you think they're going to work through. And when you start using combinations, it gets really complicated because you start hitting pathways that the individual drugs don't necessarily hit by themselves. And as I mentioned, we're learning about new disease biology that we didn't know about before. But the other last point I'm going to make is that many of these drugs have been used for many, many, many years. And so if we look at what we call the CPRD, which is the Clinical Practice Research Database, this is something unique to the NHS. We've been collecting patient records for, I think it's about 20 years now, and we have millions of patients on this record. Now, what would be really interesting, and this is a project that we would really like to be able to do, is to combine our work with the computational biologists and mathematicians and say, if we just look who took what drugs and who got what disease 10, 20, 30 years later, do we find that patients who just took, I don't know, simvastatin suddenly don't get, have a reduced risk of developing X, Y, or Z? Then we are already identifying opportunities, novel opportunities. Now, that is a mathematical, computational question, which is completely out of my league because I'm very much a cell biologist. But by combining the different disciplines like AI, computer learning, mathematics, with the clinical information that's available in the NHS and the CPRD, we may actually have a lot of answers already sitting there waiting to be harvested.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much. What a great way to get us into lunch. Now, before we go to lunch, I just need to say to you that some of you, myself included, have let us know that you've got a dietary requirement. That has all been catered for. But can you just flag that to the staff, because it's not out on the table for other people to take. They will, Darren at the back, there waving, we'll make sure that you get the lunch you asked for. So lunch is at the back of the room. Please help yourself, mingle around, move tables so you get a chance to talk to each other, and we will see you at 1 o'clock for the next bit of the programme. Thank you so much. We're just about to start again. I'm hoping you've all had a chance to have something to eat and a cup of tea or a drink. If you want to just find a seat, feel free to mix it up and change seats if you want, or return to where you were before. It's a great pleasure now to introduce a colleague, Liz Batali, who is here. Good. Liz is our Research Communications Manager, so she's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the research that's been happening and what we've got to look forward to over the coming few months.
Hello everybody and welcome. Like Gemma said, I'm the Research Communications Manager at Bloodwise. I've been with Bloodwise for about 2 years and I absolutely love it. It's amazing. It's amazing kind of what our research is doing, what our support services are doing. It's amazing what you guys are doing as well, raising money, and it's really humbling to go to these events and meet people that have actually been affected by blood cancer as well. So it's just brilliant. Just click that. Will that work? So just to quickly run through what you'll hear about from me is why it's so important to support research, how your support is making such a difference, and what the future holds for people living with blood cancer. So why support research? What is the point of doing research? So improving the lives of people with blood cancer is at the heart of what we do. It's incredibly important that we do this. So how can we save the lives of people living with blood cancer, and how can we stop the suffering this horrible disease inflicts on people? And we know really the only way we can do this is through research. So take Hugo here. Gemma mentioned Hugo earlier. He finishes his treatment on Tuesday, so it's really, really fantastic news. He's incredibly brave. He's gone through all that treatment, but unfortunately he's been in hospital for more than half his life, and he's been enduring some really incredibly harsh treatment. And he's not only he's coming through his ordeal, but he's being left with some quite horrible side effects. Part of our research is, we want to help people with blood cancer, but we also want to give them some kinder cures as well. So our research can be broken down into these three main strands. So obviously, we want to develop cures for those who have blood cancer now and in the future as well. And we would continue want to improve the treatment and care for those who are living with blood cancer today. And our third strand here is stopping blood cancer before it starts. So it's not about sort of preventing blood cancer, because there's little you can do to prevent blood cancer from happening. It's not like you can make lifestyle changes like with smoking and lung cancer. There's little you can do. What we're looking at is sort of these conditions that sort of are before blood cancer takes hold. So, for instance, there's a condition called MGUS. Some of you might know that. It's monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance. And what this is, lots of people can live with it. You can have no symptoms, but in about 1 to 2% of people, they will go on to develop myeloma. And some of our research is looking at how that happens. Why does MDS go to myeloma? And really importantly, how can we stop that from happening? And I do believe Chris might touch on that after me. So what you do need to know as well is that we're funding about 160 grants all across the UK, around 40 centres, that's hospitals, research institutes and universities. And we've got a team of like 400 researchers who are incredibly dedicated in helping us beat blood cancer. And what I'm going to do is quite quickly go over some of these achievements. So I haven't got much time to go over all these lovely achievements that what we've managed to achieve. There's an annual report actually on your table that overviews some more of our research achievements. So if you do want to know a bit more, you can have a look through there. It's a great read. I suggest you have a look through. So I'll start off with this one. How can we predict how some blood cancers will behave? So, for instance, myeloma and MDS can behave very differently. They can really vary widely in outcomes. So somebody with myeloma might go to a doctor and might be told they have only 2 years to live, or maybe 20 years. So it's really incredibly, quite wide. And also MDS can develop, it's a blood cancer, but it can develop into a more aggressive form of leukemia. And about 20% of people who have MDS will see this happen, unfortunately. So we have some researchers in Cardiff led by Duncan Baird, and they are looking at something called telomeres. And they're protective stretches of DNA that sits sort of at the end of your chromosome. So chromosomes is where all your genetic information, all the instructions to your cells are held in the chromosome. And telomeres are these protective sort of caps at the end. So it's a bit like shoelaces, and you've got the plastic caps at the end of your shoelace, which stops it fraying. So as your cells divide, that's what they do every day, the telomeres get shorter and shorter. So they get to a point where they're very, very short, and they basically can't hold the shoelace together. So all the shoelace becomes frayed, and this is kind of what happens to your DNA. So when it becomes frayed, we see cancer developing, or maybe if you've got cancer and you're taking drugs, you might have resistance to your treatment, and this is down to these telomeres sort of not protecting the end of your DNA anymore. So what these researchers have done, they've looked at these telomeres at the end of chromosomes, and they saw that the shorter your telomeres were, you're probably going to progress quite quickly. Myeloma and MDS might progress quite quickly and might become quite quickly resistant to drugs. So they developed a test now which measures the telomere length, and this can predict basically how well somebody will do who has myeloma or MDS. So this is a really, really great achievement. And he's also looking at that for chronic lymphocytic leukemia as well. So moving on to childhood leukemia, we've been funding an incredible scientist called Professor Mel Greaves, who's at the Institute of Cancer Research. And he's been devoting most of his life into looking at childhood leukemia. And he's already, found some incredible things. So we know that the development of the most common form of childhood leukemia, which is acute lymphoblastic leukemia, it's actually a two-step process. So something happens to the baby while it's still in the womb. It's a very chance mutation, and that's the first step. And then there's a second step, which actually triggers something else, and that causes childhood leukemia. And what he's done is he thinks the second trigger is actually our immune system is not reacting to things in a normal way. So you have a common cold or cough as a child, you can deal with that quite quickly and quite normally. So this is kind of how our immune system kind of deals with our common cold. So he's saying that possibly the immune system reacts in an abnormal way. So why does this happen? So he thinks possibly in children whose immune system hasn't had to work from a very early stage, so they've not been really exposed to common colds or sneezes, the immune system is reacting in an abnormal way. So this is what's triggering the second sort of trigger, and that's causing childhood leukemia to happen. This is incredibly exciting. We're a really long way off to preventing childhood leukemia. So there's other experiments he needs to do, possibly in the laboratory, to investigate this a bit more. We also need to say there's nothing a parent can do to prevent childhood leukemia from happening. It's all down to chance. So even though we're talking about preventing it to happen, on this second stage, preventing the second trigger from happening, that first change is just all down to chance. There's nothing we can do to stop it from happening. So Gemma mentioned earlier about the Destiny trial, and this is looking at basically reducing treatment for people who are living with chronic myeloid leukemia. So it's come a long way, actually, treatment for CML. So it used to mean chemotherapy and a stem cell transplant, but now lots of people can take a daily pill. It's called a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, and they can live quite happily with their leukemia. But unfortunately, there's some side effects that come with that. So there's cramp, diarrhea, tiredness. If you've got one of these symptoms, it's still tricky, but, some people might have a couple of these symptoms. They have to take these pills every day. So it's living with these, side effects every day. And people that want to have children, they have to come off these drugs as well. And coming off those drugs, you're increasing the chance of the leukemia to get worse. But if you stay on them, the baby might have birth defects. So we're supporting the Destiny trial. This is being run by Richard Clark in Liverpool. And he is looking at a group of patients who are doing really well on their TKIs. And basically, can we start reducing the dose? So this would be brilliant. So it, obviously takes people off these drugs that cause them side effects. But it needs to be done in a very safe way. So what he did, for people who were doing really well, over a year, he took the dose down. And then the people that were doing well at the end of that year, he looked at taking them off the treatment completely. So I'm just going to get some water. Sorry. So the people that were doing really well, he took them off the dose completely. And some of the people were able to stay off the dose, stay off their drugs completely. And people who saw their cancer return, they were able to put on their, they were able to go back onto their TKIs quite safely and went back into remission. It was really, really amazing results for us, and there were some other trials that were going on around the world, but the Destiny trial had some really fantastic results. And what they think it is because the dose was gradually reduced, so this sort of slow reduction. So I guess it's kind of, going from a really hot bath and being thrown into some cold water is sort of a shock. But if you just reduce that temperature down bit by bit, then obviously, your body can kind of deal with that. And it's really, really great. So it looks like actually we might even change guidelines on how CML is managed today. So it's really, really great news. So that's a quick run-through of my of Bloodwise's research achievements. So now it's time to talk about what the future might hold for people living with blood cancer. So Gemma touched on this CAR-T treatment that some of you might have heard about. It's been held as a game changer in terms of the results it's giving. There's people that are on this treatment that we're seeing only had a few months to live, and actually we're talking about cures and certainly being free of their blood cancer. It's a game changer in the way the treatment is made as well. So it's a completely new way of treating cancer. So what happens is a patient, the T cells are taken from the patient. These are white blood cells, so immune cells that go around your body and help you fight infection. So blood is taken from a patient. The T cells are taken out and they're taken into the lab, and they are reprogrammed essentially to find cancer cells. And then they're given back to the patient where they can go through the bloodstream and they can hunt down and find these cancer cells and they can kill them. So it's a completely new way of treating blood cancer. It's completely personalised to the individual patient as well. So it's really, really exciting. And it's designed to be a one-off treatment, so it's not like chemotherapy going into the hospital and having sort of rounds of treatment. It's a one-off treatment, and because it's a living drug, it's made out of your T cells, cells that are already in your immune system, so they can circulate around your body and stay there. So if the cancer shows any signs of returning, these T cells will still be around to kind of find them and hunt them down. So it's really, really amazing stuff. And only 2 weeks ago, NICE announced that this treatment would be available for children with the most common form of leukemia, so ALL. So we're really excited about that. So it's really, really interesting stuff. We still don't know. It's still a new treatment. So, as always in research, we say more research is needed. So we still need to see, how long does the response last? And the side effects can be quite severe. So it has to be given in a hospital, and people need to be monitored very, very closely for the first 30 days for any side effects. But it's great, and it looks like it might become available for other blood cancers. And Bloodwise are actually funding 2 projects that are looking into CAR-T treatment. So one's for an aggressive lymphoma, and the other one is for a certain type of leukemia. And we're also kind of heading towards, it's a strong word to use, cure, but, we've gone from, chronic forms of leukemia, so CLL, CML, it used to mean chemotherapy and stem cell transplants, but now we've got lots of new targeted treatments that have come in, and Clarity, Gemma touched on, and it features in our annual report as well. And that's looked at some targeted treatment for CLL, and it's showing remarkable results. People going into remission just 18 months after treatment. It's looking really, really great. Personalised medicine, some of you might have heard of that. I think now doctors know that one treatment doesn't fit all. You can't just take a pill. Everybody's blood cancer is different, and we need to look at what those differences are. And there's lots of different drugs that work on specific differences in the blood cancer. So you know, that's a really exciting thing, and it's going to go from strength to strength. And then we've got new treatments on the horizon. I mean, Farhat talks about repurposing treatments as well, so that's really exciting. But for instance, in AML, it's been chemotherapy for the last couple of decades actually, and now we've got 3 new treatments have come in which are targeted, and they look really, really great. And Chris is going to be talking after me about new ways of treating aggressive leukemias as well, so that's really, really great. Sorry. And what my final point, which I think is really, really important, is that breakthroughs in blood cancer has actually led the way in lots and lots of different things. So, for instance, I mean, Farhat touched on it as well. I mean, I think in blood cancer we've got, it's extremely talented groups of scientists that are working on things right from sort of basic science in the laboratory, finding out how blood cancer works, right through to the translational stuff, taking those discoveries in the lab and moving them into the clinic and having these clinical trials. And blood cancer research we've got extremely talented people in all sort of ways along that pipeline. And it's really easy to take a blood sample, so it's not like taking a sample from lung cancer or a brain tumour, which can be quite hard to reach places. Blood's very easy to get hold of, you just need to take a sample. So it gives researchers like a great source of cancer cells to study in quite an easy way. So for instance, in blood cancer, it was the first time people realised that actually DNA damage causes cancer. So this was found in CML. There's a particular mutation that drives a gene change that drives CML, and that quickly led to new targeted drugs, so drugs that could actually target this gene change, and it's led to such remarkable improvements. And also, blood cancer research has given us incredible insight to how our immune system works as well, and that's led to massive improvements in other diseases, so other diseases that affect the immune system, so HIV and AIDS, and it's also given us insight into how sort of allergies work and infections, and also has helped with kind of understanding how to make transplants better as well. So it's a really incredible exciting time, I think, in blood cancer research, and we're leading the way in lots and lots of ways. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to you all. All of these incredible achievements just wouldn't have been possible without you guys and our researchers and the Bloodwise family, like Gemma said, all of us working together. So it's just, incredibly humbling. I'm meeting lots of you today as well. So I'd like to say a really, really big thank you to you all, and thank you for listening. And I'm going to introduce you now to Professor Chris Bunce, and he was our research director at Bloodwise actually for a while, so he helped forge quite a lot of the achievements we've done as well. So he's back in the lab, and he's going to be telling us a little bit more about finding new treatments for leukemia and lymphoma.
Thank you, Liz. I think Farhat will find the definition of me back in the lab as a rather amusing definition. So we're having a lot of fun today. It's got a great buzz in the room. I personally have now just about recovered from the vision I had in my head of John Purser in vintage lingerie. And now you all have that image in your head. Can I use this? Yeah. Am I away? Okay, this is me in that aforementioned lab, my natural habitat. And I've spent many years being able to work in a laboratory space and try and help people with blood cancer. And this little table that I've put together sort of talks a little bit of my story. It starts back in the 80s. It's now in 2018, and I've put a what next. We'll see why that is. But I was employed in a lab in the med school as a research assistant and was able to register for my PhD back in 1981, and that was on a grant from this charity. There were 2 years, 1985 and 1986, when in my career I was neither paid by this charity or didn't have some association with a grant from this charity. But for the rest of my career, and I bet most of you can kind of guess what kind of age I am, I have either been paid in the red blocks and or I've had grant funding from this organisation. And I would reiterate what Farhat said this morning about the consistency of support and developing talent that this charity has done. And there was Peter Hillman in Gemma's presentation earlier on. So that could not have happened without you guys and people like you guys. And so I just want to reiterate all the thanks and gratitude that's been said before me already today. So, we often use this example of why we're such a great organisation and why science works. This is a graphical representation of what used to be the case in childhood acute leukemias and what is the case now. And we've heard today about the possibility now that that extra bit that we still need to fill into this puzzle to get it 100%, well, there's a possibility that CAR T cells will be that, which is really exciting. But maybe we get a little preoccupied with this particular example, massively important though it is, because this is not the only success that has happened in this time frame. Now, you remember I started as a researcher in the 1980s. Here's what's happened in CML during that time. These are survival curves. Now, what we want is the line to go right across the top, 100% survival across the top. What these different lines are different times, different periods, going in advance from when I started as a researcher to where we are now. And Gemma and Liz have talked about the work that Bloodwise is supporting, how we're actually getting to the point now where we can actually de-escalate the amount of treatment to improve conditions of life and possibly also survival. Now, what I find remarkable about that is one generation of research. I am the evidence that it is one generation of research. So where are we going to get in the next generation of research? I think it's mind-boggling to contemplate it. So, why did I become a blood cancer researcher? I'm a biologist. I live and breathe biology. It's probably the only thing I can do reasonably well. I wanted to study the biology of humans because I'm also a human being. I'm quite passionate about being a human being as well. And as has already been mentioned, if you really want to study the process of cell differentiation, which is my passion, these are all blood cells. I think you're all good enough biologists in the room to see that they are different. They have all come from the same blood stem cell, and they have become different, and that's the process we call cell differentiation. And they become different because they have to do different jobs for us. So the one on the left is a red blood cell, and that takes oxygen from our lungs to our tissues, picks up CO2 and shuffles it back. When I'm talking to kids about this, I say that's the Eddie Stobart of the blood cell world. The one in the middle is a platelet. Now that's the one that stops us bleeding to death all the time and actually makes our blood clot when we cut ourselves, right? So I say that's the motorway maintenance. And then the other one is a lymphocyte, and that's part of our immune system. That's a white blood cell, and I call that the traffic cops. And I talk about all these cells going around the roadworks in our body. Now, this process of cell differentiation is absolutely vital. I once spoke to a group of school kids that were between the age of 8 and 11 and talked about this process of cells stopping dividing and changing and becoming something useful. And one young girl stuck up her hand and said, if that's so, why don't we run out of cells? And that child, in that moment, had come up with the concept of stem cell biology, which took my discipline 100 years to develop. And what realized is that you have to have cells that can self-renew, divide and replace themselves to keep the top of the system pumped up. Now, what goes wrong sometimes in leukemias and other blood cancers is that cells get locked in a process of dividing and reproducing themselves and not doing this differentiation. So now, suddenly, I was interested in differentiation. There's a tissue you can get at, because working on brain differentiation is not so easy, because people don't give you bits of brain very often. They will give you blood and bone marrow. And so I had a system where I could study the biology that I was passionate about in a context of where it could make a difference. And I started working on this cell line. I was one of the first people in this country to work on this cell line because my boss had been over to America where they'd just developed it, stuck it in his pocket and flew back on a plane with it in his pocket. You wouldn't get away with that these days. And this is a really interesting cell line because it's a leukemia cell that if you put it in a plastic bottle and give it nutrients in the form of some liquid media and stick it in a warm place about the same temperature as the human body, it will just grow in a plastic bottle. So it'll do this. One cell will become 2 cells, 2, 4. 4, 8, etc. And we call this exponential growth. And this is what tumour cells can do. However, if you take this cell and you give it something called ATRA, it completely remembers what it should have done. And it changes, it differentiates, it stops dividing. At a certain point, it has what's called a polymorphonucleus here, or we sometimes call it a neutrophil, and that is nature's antibiotic. That cell there is the cell that's stopping you all dying of infections as you sat out there. If I was to click my fingers and remove all your lymphocytes, you would live quite healthily for some time to come. If I clicked my fingers and removed your neutrophils, some of you would be dead by the end of the day. They are amazing cells. So this got me and the world very excited and led to this story. This is a timeline for acute promyelocytic leukemia. This is not my research, I hasten to add. And you see the timeline, and it's similar to the graph that I showed you for CML. And in the generation of this researcher's lifetime, APL has just about been dealt with. And now it's gone from being the most aggressive leukemia that humans get to the most curable one, and we're currently curing it in the absence of chemotherapy. So, Farhat has largely told you about the history of the research we've done together. So I'm going to talk to you about the impact that working for the charity had on me and the impact it's had on the research that I now want to do. So this slide it is just me being honest, that it was a terrific honour to work down in Eagle Street with colleagues, and it has profoundly impacted me both as a person and as a researcher. One of the things that I did when I was at Bloodwise is I used the data from the HMRN, the Hematological Malignancy Research Network, there's a mouthful for you, which is funded by Bloodwise, which is the most remarkable blood cancer epidemiology database on the planet. The National Cancer Registries do not understand blood cancers well enough to record the data for us to know what's happening to our patients. HMRN do. They have a population which they monitor. They follow every patient with a blood cancer diagnosis until their death, irrespective of whether they're cured or not, and whatever their cause of death is. They have years and years of data that tell us how often the different types of blood cancers arise within the population, and they have real-time live data to tell us what survival in those blood cancers look like. Unfortunately, the flip side of survival is non-survival. So we also know how many people are dying of these indications. And if you combine their prevalence with how many people are dying, you can work out where the biggest problems are at any given point in time. And this, although it looks like a static graph, is a tremendously dynamic graph. So diseases like CML and CLL are walking rapidly down that way, which means then other diseases become a priority as they move up the other way. So that I wanted to use this to have a sense check about whether our research portfolio in the 2000s was still relevant. That's why I did it. But some of the data that came out of it shocked me so much, it's profoundly affected what I now want to research when I have come back. And one of the things was that I was one of those people who had it in my head that MDS was a pre-malignant condition. But what this data told me, that irrespective of transformation into AML, MDS kills just as many people as AML does, just as much. So it made me want to focus on MDS. Now, we've already heard that some MDS do transform to AML, it's about 20% or so. And when they do, the AML that arises from it is harder to treat than the bulk of AML. So that's a problem. Also, the AML that arises from MDS is 10% of AML. So if we were able to prevent MDS from ever going to AML, we would save lives and we would prevent 10% of AML. When was it the last time that there was an influence of 10% in AML? Well, it was when ATRA came along and APL. So APL used to be bumped into AML,
But because ATRA's come along, because it's treated differently, and because we can have success, it's no longer considered to be in the same bag. And we can take the MDS-driven AML out of that bag. And that's a form of prevention that I'm interested in trying to do. So, many patients with AML and MDS get infections. That's not surprising. I've just told you about the neutrophil, the polymorphonucleoside, call it what you want, the nature's antibiotic. When you get MDS and AML, you make fewer of those cells, and they're not as functionally good, the ones that you make them. And so you get infections. What do we do to these patients? We treat them with chemotherapy. What does chemotherapy do? Damage your ability to make blood cells, so you get still more infections. So infections are a real problem, and they are managed. We, several years ago, published a study that showed that AML cells release a protein, and they use that protein to affect other cells in their microenvironment and other cells in the tumour clone to encourage the body and the tumour clone to promote its survival. This is a protein that in humans is called NM23, and I'm fascinated by it because it's one of the most evolutionarily conserved proteins in biology. So conserved that bacteria have their version. So what if these bacteria are releasing similar proteins to the human one that also promotes the progression of the disease? So that was the question I had. I posed this question to your research committee, and bless them, that letter is a letter saying that I've been awarded a grant from Bloodwise to investigate this possibility. So in terms of highlights of this 12 months, for me, that letter is a very, very big highlight. And we started the study earlier in the year, about April time. We've got really great data. It's going really well. But why should we be convinced that this is a problem? I'll just show you a little bit of a data slide. This is what's called an X-ray crystallography structure. It's a way of looking at what proteins look like in 3D shape. Now, there's a red and green there. One of them is the human, and the other one is a bacterial protein superimposed on it. Look how similar they are. It doesn't show very well in this light. These are primary cells that we've got in culture. If you take, oddly enough, I showed you the HL60 cell line, which will grow in culture. Usually, if you take a blood cancer cell out of a patient and put it in cell culture, it won't survive. Rarely they do, and we can make cell lines out of them, but they don't normally. So here's some cells that have been put in with just ordinary buffer. Buffer is a word we use for a solution that contains various salts and things. And in here, we've got the addition of the human protein. And in here, we've got the addition of various bacterial proteins. These cells are dead. These are all alive. So these bacterial proteins that are evolutionarily conserved can affect the same pro-cancerous effect as something that's been secreted by acute myeloid leukemia cells. And we want to understand what that mechanism is, and we want to understand where we can interfere in that mechanism. In the myeloma world, we've just finished a trial, we, the community, not me as an individual, called TEAM, which is a prophylactic antibiotic trial, because myeloma patients also get infections, and that's a large cause of death. And that's the question is, if you get a diagnosis of myeloma, is it safe to put someone on antibiotics, and will they do better? And the reason why that's a really important question is the NHS is very nervous, as we all know, about the use of antibiotics. So the two endpoints was, would the patients do better, and would there be no increase in hospital superbug infections? And both of those have been passed, and it's really exciting. Interestingly, the myeloma guys wanted to do the second phase trial. The MDS guys in the country have always wanted to do a prophylactic antibiotic trial in MDS. They've actually come to Bloodwise and had it assessed in the past and deemed fundable, but at the moment there wasn't sufficient money for it. I happened to sit in the room with an MDS doctor and a myeloma doctor Myeloma doctor was saying we need to do team 2. MDS doctor was saying we're really jealous of you because we want to do that. And I said, why don't you do it all in the same trial? And that is what's going forward. So for the first time, we're going to have a trial that recruits myeloma and MDS patients asking the same question across very different diseases. So, what next? Well, there are 2 clinical trials coming up in MDS and myeloma that we're involved in. One of them is that antibiotic trial. The other is the VBAP trial that Farhat told you about. The VBAP trial will be a randomization of low-risk MDS into standard normal therapy, our experimental therapy, VBAP, and a third experimental therapy called danazol. Now, danazol is interesting. Where's Liz gone? Where are you gone, Liz? Danazol is believed to work by repairing the telomeres. I have some skepticism about that, but that's really... So Duncan Baird, who you mentioned, is coming on board with that trial and is going to measure telomere length and health in all 3 arms of the randomization. So Bloodwise is very heavily involved in that. And is infection a reason why diseases are being progressed research will be the bolt-on research to the other trial. So although these trials may well be funded by people outside of Bloodwise, a lot of the research and the information that's going into them and is informing them and will come out of them will be Bloodwise supported research. And we will be seeking support for that associated science going forward. We've got some money at the moment. We need to deliver. We'll be coming back to you if we want some more. The real-world impact of MGUS is the other thing that I haven't had time to go into today. We know every single myeloma comes from MGUS. We know 3% of the individuals over 50 in this country have an MGUS. Look around the room. Think about what I've just said. We can diagnose MGUS cheaply, efficiently, with very little distress to the patient in terms of physical distress. Very, very easily, with 99% accuracy. Here is our challenge. It's very, very difficult because if we do screen for MGUS, only a minority of those patients are going to go and get myeloma. But if we really want a prevention opportunity, we can diagnose MGUS in asymptomatic, healthy patients. We can monitor them, and the minute it starts to get a bit worrying, we can treat early. At the moment, myeloma is diagnosed when people walk into emergency departments, their doctors not having understood what they've got, and they come in with heart disease, they come in with kidney disease, they come in with skeletal disease, and we can prevent that. That is our one big opportunity for prevention. And if we're going to do that, that means we have to develop therapies that are less toxic than the ones that we currently have. Because if you're going to treat someone that has an MGUS but is otherwise healthy, you don't want to give them chemotherapy drugs that are going to make them ill. So that's what my future looks like. I've got about 10 years to do that. Again, the age thing. So I'll do my best, and I'll try and elicit as much help as I can from the UK research community, who would not be what they are without you guys, and are amongst, if not the best in the world. So that's my story. That's my excitement. I think the future is very, very rosy indeed. Just a deference to the fact that these 2 people who we've heard about earlier in the day are my best friends and my best colleagues. And again, thank you to all of you.
I think we've got time. We've got time for questions. Just a few minutes before we move on to the next thing. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask of Chris or indeed Liz, yeah.
Hi, very interesting. Thank you very much. Can I ask you a question about the MDS? Will you be collecting some sort of etiological data, sort of, so that you can differentiate between the de novo MDS and the drug-induced MDS? I'm particularly thinking of people who've had perhaps fludarabine for CLL or other lymphomas that then develop MDS afterwards, and that is, as you said, particularly difficult to treat?
So the trial that we will do will be in what is termed low-risk MDS, which is an interesting phrase in its own right, but lower risk would be... Because just for the clarity of the answer, but we would anticipate that if either of those experimental arms work in that situation, they should work also in higher risk MDS. The BAP trial that Farhat reported on, that we had some success with, as you talked about, Mr. Grumpy. Mr. Grumpy was a high-risk MDS. He was an MDS that was in transformation towards AML, and he showed a very good and very long sustained response to our drugs. So it is a patient group I think we can help, but the trial, just because of the way trials are designed, will be low risk. You're full of them. They're good questions, though.
There's a similarity between MGUS and having that couple of % each year progress to myeloma, and the monoclonal B cell lymphocytosis that you see, which is maybe a precursor to CLL, and again, and likewise, it's another sort of 2% a year. Do you think we can learn something from the MGUS, looking at the MGUS people, that might help the people with CLL?
So both those conditions were on my... The interesting thing about MGUS compared to the CLL condition is that MGUS, irrespective of going on to myeloma, is the 6th or 7th biggest killer on there. I completely fell off my chair when I saw that data. Now, you go to a hematologist, and the hematologist says, they're not dying of their MGUS. We only know that they've got MGUS because they're dying of something, because they've been investigated. So only about 3% of MGUS ever gets diagnosed. That's a massive and unsafe assumption. So there are 97% of people with an MGUS out there that's not currently diagnosed, but some of them will have heart disease, some of them will have skeletal disease, some of them will have renal disease. The evidence is that all the risks of those diseases and infection is elevated in that group of patients, but we don't know what the real story is. So one of the things that I want to do is an epidemiological study that actually tells us what the health impact of MGUS itself is, because it's very difficult to get the NHS or the government to agree to screening MGUS if it's only 1% of patients that go on to get a cancer. If, however, we can screen people with MGUS and stratify them with respect to their risk of the various other situations, then we could save the NHS a lot of money, and we could save a lot of people a lot of suffering. So that becomes where we have to work with other people in other areas to achieve what we want by helping them also achieve what they want. Now, the B-cell precursor condition is right down the left-hand end. And now when it does transform, we thanks to Pete Hillman and others, we have such a fantastic battery of lower toxicity interventions that yes, in the future we could probably think about prevention, but the natural strategy now would be not to screen for it and wait till the disease arises and then deal with it with these fantastic drugs that we currently have. Are you introducing?
Oh, you introducing.
So, the next and final speaker is Anna Manuel, who's one of our ambassadors and a patient, and she's going to be very interesting to hear from, I think.
Hi. Thank you, Chris. So before I start, I'd just like to say I'm not as proficient as these other speakers today. It's not something I've done many times. Like a lot of things since my diagnosis, I am new to doing this sort of thing. So first I wanted to just explain where it all began for me. Back in 2015, I was just a normal person going about my life, a wife, a mother, daughter, sister, colleague, friend. Never in a million years thought I'd be stood here now. So like everyone else, I was living life, fairly healthy, always exercised, didn't drink much, didn't smoke. So to find myself with an AML diagnosis was an absolute shock. And also because I was one of those people that didn't know that blood cancer is the 5th most common cancer in the UK. I didn't know any of its symptoms at all, and it turns out I actually had 6 of them. And reiterating really what Gemma said earlier, I'd gone to my GP, but I didn't mention all the symptoms. Some of them I didn't think were symptoms. I'd only been feeling unwell for a couple of weeks, so how could it be leukemia? I didn't even really know that I could get leukemia. So, and obviously the figures are that 1 in 10 people, or only 1 in 10 people are confident that they know the symptoms of blood cancer, and I was one of those. So I suppose it's not surprising. So really, basically, to echo everything that Gemma said, my diagnosis went to my GP, sent away with antibiotics. It was only by chance that the nurse practitioner at my doctor's surgery just sent me for some bloods, just as I was leaving the practice. She just sort of said, just see if something's showing up, go and have your bloods done, which I nearly didn't go. And basically that saved my life, because the next day I was in hospital with 90% bone marrow failure. My organs were in trouble, I had sepsis, and if I'd have not gone then, and I dread to think what would have happened. So that's kind of like how my diagnosis happened. So going back to it was April, where we were thrown into this world of blood cancer, which is a devastating and cruel world, but it's also heartwarming and enlightening. Treatment for AML is brutal. It leaves you with many long-term issues. So here I am 3 years on, still fighting the fatigue, the chemo brain, the pain, and all the other effects it's had on my body. Also, having spent 6 months in hospital away from my family and my 8-year-old daughter. You can imagine that's taken its toll on all of us. Also, the trauma of all the side effects caused by the really intense chemotherapy. There were lots of moments, scary moments, awful sort of side effects, the sepsis, the unconscious moments when my family were really scared. So going back to this links into the research and everything about kinder, better treatments, because I can't stress enough what a massive, massive effect all that has had on me and my family. And also, after all of that, this is another issue, and I know it is another issue that Bloodwise are aware of, is the aftercare and the living well with blood cancer, because neither my daughter nor I have had any psychological help dealing with this massive thing in our lives. So and I have tried all the avenues before anyone suggests anything. I am quite proactive. I also lost my job, which I loved. That was as a result of a combination of things. Maybe my employer didn't know the rules or the law, but again, the law doesn't go far enough as far as blood cancer patients are concerned, because the treatment takes so long and the illness takes so long. But I won't go into that now because that's another long story. But it's just to really show the consequences of the diagnosis and the treatment and everything. So another thing that I've found is that blood cancer is never sort of, when you go to places like doctors' surgeries or hospitals and things, you see the leaflets, you see the posters about other illnesses, other cancers. There never seems to be blood cancer up there. And that's something that I want to help change, and I'm sure other people in this room feel exactly the same. And I know that Bloodwise, again, are aware of that. So it's good to know, really, as a patient, that Bloodwise do have your back. They do know what needs to be done. They do listen, and they are acting on it. So obviously, after this diagnosis, my life has changed completely, and there's this thing called the new normal. you can't go back to what you were before, and it can be quite a lonely place, especially depending on where you live in the country, and I live in quite a rural area. So thankfully I have connected with some really lovely people, some inspiring people, and that is mainly through Bloodwise, which I will always be grateful for. But however, I had to be proactive and I had to go out and find these people. Luckily, that's the kind of person I am, but I know some people don't find it that easy. So with the launch of their online forum, which I know Louise mentioned earlier, which if it had been around when I'd been diagnosed, it would have been really, really helpful. So that's another really good thing that the charity has done. It's listened to us and it's acted on it. And that, is again, is important. It's all right listening, but you like to see things changing and action being taken. So now sort of moving on to how it feels, knowing that about all the research that the charity does. That's just stuff that we've done for Bloodwise, which I'll talk about later. It's really important for me when I'm doing all this fundraising and so on and telling people about Bloodwise to hear about the research, because at the end of the day, that's what motivates me. That the end result will be hopefully one day kind of treatments, more knowledge and maybe even a cure. To know that there's hope on the horizon is really important. Living with this thing, AML, which for me is in remission at the moment, and it has been for 3 years, which is a positive, but the fear of relapse is at times really overwhelming. So what keeps me going and keeps me positive is knowing that there's people working to change this, to find out more, to maybe, you know, like I say, one day, I mean, I don't know why it happened. They don't know why I got it or it happened in my body, which I'm okay with. But I think one day knowing why it happens will be a big thing for patients, because I think it helps with the dealing with it. So going on now to some of the things that I do with Bloodwise. Fundraising obviously is important, because without that we wouldn't have this fantastic research and the campaign that's going on in Westminster and the patient leaflets and the forum and all the support that we have. So I just want to talk about a little bit why, sort of like how it's helped me really being involved in that way. So it has actually enabled me to create a lot of positives from my diagnosis, and being proactive has helped me get back in control of the situation. None of us have any control over the diagnosis. Obviously, it comes out of the blue and you feel really like, well, in shock, and obviously you can't change that, but you can actually control how you live with it and what you do and how you move forward. So that's kind of where I've channeled my energy. Fundraising is something that I'm passionate about. I know that every penny I pass on to Bloodwise is going into a good place and being used, you know, wisely. And also, the way I look at it as well is that in the past, there's been people like us in this room, the inspiring people, the selfless people who have tirelessly given up their time to raise the vital funds that has meant that the research has gone on over the last 60 years. Because of that research, a lot of us are still here. If that hadn't happened, if people hadn't given up their spare time, I know how hard it is to run an event. I've done quite a few events. I know how much hard work goes into it. But if people hadn't done it in the past, we wouldn't be where we are now. So I see it that I'm now in that position to be this generation doing it, ready for the next generation. It's like paying it forward. That's sort of like one of my big things. I feel like because my life was saved, because I'm lucky enough to be here, whereas a lot of people aren't, there's no way that I could just sit back and do nothing. So I have to do all of this, you know, with Bloodwise, because I feel like that's the least I can do for those that are not as fortunate as me. So the things that we've done over the past 3 years, some of the pictures up here, the Prudential Ride London, that isn't me, it's my husband. I just take the pictures. The Waistcoat Wednesday, I don't know if anybody else got involved in that. That was good fun. I borrowed my dad's waistcoat. Where is he? Oh, he's there. There's my daughter. It's been lovely for her, actually, being involved with the charity, because obviously it was a horrible time for her to have her mum taken away one night, really, really ill and not there for 6 months. But Bloodwise has given us sort of a lot of positives, and she gets involved. She comes up with her own ideas. She even went round her school selling pin badges and talking about Bloodwise. She raised about £200. So, and it's lovely. And she did actually say to me when she grows up she wants to be an ambassador. So, you know, it has given us a lot of lovely moments since. We did a Tea with the Girls event. There's golf days. There's a bike-a-thon there, and I mean, we've just done lots of things. And the thing is about it, it's not just about raising the money for me, it's about making memories. So when you're doing these events, you often see people you don't meet very often, you meet new people. Some of my friends come along that I probably only see once or twice a year. So it's really, really nice, positive feeling about it. And you get some lovely gestures. People do things that really touch you. And you think, you know, it's not just about raising money, it's about the whole package. So I just really wanted to get that point across about the fundraising, that it's like not just about standing there and taking people's money, it's about how it feels. And like with the Tea with the Girls thing, the support I had was brilliant. I actually did it. Well, started off obviously to be in my house, but it turned out the more people were wanting to be involved, it was not going to be enough room. So we had a local golf club, and they were really supportive and helped us out with not charging for the room. The amount of cakes we had was amazing, and people that I hadn't seen for a year sort of turned up, and we had some people come that had just seen it advertised and didn't know about the charity come along. So like I say, all those things is what makes us do it. And we also do a charity ball, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. We have about 150 people. And what I love about that is obviously we're raising money and people are really generous, and it's really touching, and people like donate these really brilliant auction prizes, like football, you know, VIP football tickets to Man United or something like that. But also on the night, everyone's got smiles on their faces, they're all up and dancing, they're having a great time. And I'm thinking, for me, because of what I've been through, because I know how fragile life can be, watching everyone having fun with smiles on their faces that they can go home and talk about and remember, that's also really important. You know, that's also part of doing the fundraising. So that's sort of a point I wanted to make there. I think that is me.
Thank you, Anna. That was brilliant and inspiring. And I was going to say that Anna works tirelessly as an ambassador, but I think occasionally she does get tired, but that doesn't stop her. She carries on. So tirefully she works to bring awareness in all sorts of different forums. So we are really, really grateful. And I know that today, like lots of other things you've done, you pushed yourself again to do something that you don't normally do, which is speak in front of a large group of people. And I know I speak for all of us when I say you did it brilliantly, and we're hugely grateful. So it falls to me, I think, to bring the day to an end, which is sadness, really, because I, for one, have had a brilliant day and I've learned a huge amount. Thank you to all of you for everything that you have done up until now and everything that I know you'll go on and do. I hope that we have given you confidence that we are looking after the money that you raise for us well, and that we are spending it well, and we'll continue to do that. You've given us lots of ideas, and in some cases actually some really helpful challenge about things we could be doing that we're not doing, or things we are doing that we could get better at. And from my perspective, I always want to hear those things. So I've heard a couple of people have said to me, oh, I didn't want to bother you with that. You won't be bothering me with that. If there are things in the future that you feel that we should know and we don't know, or you think we've got something a bit wrong, or you've just spotted an opportunity of a place that we're not in, that we could be in, then do let me know. Contact me directly or contact the team through any of the numbers you have, and we will be welcome it gratefully. So thank you very much. You're very welcome to stay around for a little bit. I think we've got the room for another half hour. Oh, and John.
Just before you close, as a new trustee, I have to say I found this
John, come here, and then you'll be on there.
He's always telling me off.
I just want YouTube. I want your thousands of people out here to
As
hear
a new trustee, I just want to say how grateful I am that you've let me come along today. Anna, I think you actually give us the reason why everyone wants to do this. And Chris, you sort of shuffled off the stage a bit at the end. And I'd say, for me, this is what Bloodwise is about. We have to do all these things we do to make the research make a difference. And please, can you take back to your colleagues in Birmingham and in the research community our thanks to you, and our request that you do more and bigger and better to solve this problem. Because it's not a free ride for any of us, isn't this? We're dealing with a really critical and important issue to many of you, to all the families, and as I think Gemma's research has shown, to many of us who don't know that this is a problem that we're going to face. So thank you all for coming, but Chris, more please. And finally, can I just say, if you can remember...
She's younger than me, get it?
Oh, she's over there. I missed her. I was just going to you two, I apologise, because I thought you'd scuttled off. You've changed seats. But just to say, can I just remind you all that it's Saturday, and our Bloodwise colleagues... for me, I don't work any day of the week, so this is a nice day out for me. But for them, they put an awful lot of effort into organising this for us. And can I ask you to say thank you to them for making this possible?